The night of the explosion, the demolition was starting to take place. I was on the outside of the building when there was a pop, 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 and the whole side of the building shook. I went back into the building to see what had happened, and it was undoubtedly the worst night in my life. Everything was dust coming down. It was just carnage.
Okay, so we have a very special guest joining us today, Brian Humphreys, with almost 50 years of experience in steel making and mining in the UK and Canada. Brian brings a unique perspective to the importance of safety in the industrial workplaces. He's also the author of an award-winning book, No Smoke Without Fire, A Recipe for Disaster. In his long career, Brian has seen the evolution of safety standards and practices and has a wealth of knowledge to share with us today. We're excited to have him on the show, and he can share his experiences and insights. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Okay, thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I guess just to kind of kick things off, if you could just give us a little bit about your backstory, and then if you don't mind sharing with the audience, a little bit of the events that you outlined in the book, No Smoke Without Fire, and sort of how you did get your start in safety. So just maybe how you get started in the industry, to start with, and then maybe leading up to the events in the book.
Okay, well, I started my apprenticeship in the British Steel Corporation at Shelton Steelworks in Deeside, North Wales, and I was 16 years of age. That's the normal age at the time for apprenticeships in the UK. Basically, if you haven't got an apprenticeship by the time you're 17, you don't get a trade. That's what it was at that time. The steelworks that I worked at employed almost 15,000 people. It was fully integrated, which means it started off a iron ore at one end and came out stripped steel at the other end. During my apprenticeship, I spent 4 years, 1 day a week, went to a technical college at on Deeside, and then the rest of the week was spent in the plant. I worked there till I was 29, and as a maintenance fitter, and the steelworks began to close down because of the age of it and the fact that Britain had joined the European Common Market, and I was looking for work elsewhere, and an opportunity in Canada came up in Flin Flon, Manitoba. And I took that opportunity, and along with my wife and 2 very young children at the time, we moved out to Flin Flon. And I was industrial mechanic for Hudson Bay Mining and Smelting. And about 8 or 9 years into my tenure there, I had the opportunity to go on to a staff position as a health and safety coordinator for the maintenance and services department. I'd been involved in the union. I was recording secretary for the IAM, and so I left that position. It was a part-time position, obviously, and then I went full-time into health and safety, although I'd always had an interest in health and safety throughout my career. WHMIS was just being introduced at that time, Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. So that kind of was a springboard to developing, training and my association with putting something that was brand new into place. I worked in conjunction with the union health and safety committees, and not only WHMIS, but we worked on lockout procedures, confined space, and the cornerstones of safety, as far as legislation was concerned, was the right to refuse, right to know, and the right to participate. So the right to know with the WMIS regulations was a very interesting time for everybody. And I touch on it in my book. I think it's one of the most important pieces of legislation that came out because it created an awareness within the workforce that they hadn't seen before. Be given the information on what they were working with, how to handle it, what the dangers were, and how to protect themselves.
How did the industry react to right to know legislation? Was there more training as a result, or was there something else going on?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, the labels that started to appear on the products that we were using, and I use an example of the oil absorbent that we used, or that we still use in the mines for soaking up oil spills, and we used it by the pallet load. I mean, there was no doubt that it was something that was needed, and it was something that was um, you know very valuable to use in terms of its effectiveness. When WMIS came out, all of a sudden a skull and crossbones appeared on the bag, and the warning labels saying must be used with a respirator, and it was a carcinogenic. The product hadn't changed. It was a label that had drawn people's attention to it, and a lot of the workforce were upset. They were mad because they'd been using it for years without that knowledge. Material safety data sheets. We had one time over 5,000 MSDS sheets on site. But you can imagine, the how much information was out there. It was almost information overload. That was just one aspect of it.
Mm. So, was there along your career? I know you didn't start in safety. Was there something that for you, you can look back and that initiated that, that leap, that step into the safety world? I know when we chatted before, you said early on you didn't necessarily believe in safety, or you thought the safety people were, maybe a little foolish. But can you walk us through that? How that happened for you?
Well, I've never thought of safety being foolish in terms of there's a lot of mixed feelings as to what safety is. If you go onto LinkedIn and you see the conversations around, zero, for instance, people that advocate that every accident can be prevented and every goal, should be that we don't have any accidents at all. And there's a lot of people, peddling the idea that every accident that can be eliminated. I'm not. I was part of the discussion a few years ago. I think we've moved forward, we moved on from that, but I can see some people within the industries are still hung up on the idea that zero is zero, that we can get there and everything can be can be prevented. I don't believe that anymore. I firmly believe though that we can do better, a lot better than what we're doing, and that the goal should be in excellence, that we work to continually improve and not put up with the status quo that we have. So continuous improvement and striving for excellence in what we do. The other thing that is often advocated is safety is first. Safety is number one. And again, I disagree in that, in as much that companies are not in the business, or they're not in the safety business. They're there to make a profit, and they're there to satisfy their shareholders. So, if they can produce a product safely and a quality product. That should be the goal. All three are very important and integral to each. Focus just on safety alone is one that's doomed to failure, I think.
In your book, you talk about leadership a lot, Brian. Would you rank leadership above safety or safety above leadership? Like, how do they intertwine, in your opinion?
I think in terms of the frontline supervisor, they have more influence than they believe they do have. The frontline supervisor, I think, plays a key role in safety in terms of how he sets the tone, how he plans the work out, how he distributes the work, and how he monitors it, and how he rewards people, or he or she, how they reward people for doing a good job safely. Not because it was done quickly, but because it met their expectations of how it should have been done in the first place.
Do you think they could have safety without leadership?
No, I think you've got to have leadership. You have to have a good leader who can support the whole initiatives around safety. Absolutely.
Do you think people struggle with the balance between how much safety to exercise versus how much leadership? Do you think they're two separate concepts, or they can kind of, or it's the same thing?
I think there's something that's. I don't think they should be separated. I think they intertwine each other. I think once you start separating safety from something else and kind of have it stood on its own. We worked on the internal responsibility system at the mine, so that it wasn't one person's job to do the safety. Each person within the system had a role to play, whether it was from the people that were working on the shop floor. Their role was to comply with the rules and to report hazardous conditions, to wear the PPE, maintain it, report accidents, and the supervisors, they had a list of responsibilities within the system, as did the senior managers. So I don't think you can set it off to the side and say it was completely separate. It should be intertwined with everything we do.
On page 200 in your book, the chapter titled "The Explosion," you outline the story of kind of what happened on that day, and then could you walk people through that story and also how that then led to the creation of the book?
Well, the smelter was scheduled for a maintenance shutdown, which was quite common in the very early days of their production. It was something that was an annual event. And over the years prior to the explosion, they got a lot better materials managing the furnace, and that 1 year event had turned into a 3-year event. So with the reverb furnace, it was refractory brick, suspended arch, and the brick was completely demolished, leaving just the hearth, and then it would be rebuilt with new refractory brick. It was probably half the size of a football field, to give you a perspective of its length and its width, and it had 3 burners at the front of the furnace, gas, and originally bunker C oil. It was a hot, dirty job. It was a very bad area in terms of the work environment. hot, dusty in the summertime, and outside door temperatures could go as low as -40. So it wasn't an ideal place to work in the first place, and it was a place where people joined the company. It was an opportunity. It was one of the first departments that entry level employees would go into. So the night of the explosion, they tapped the furnace out empty, and they were allowing it to cool off. And one of the earlier jobs of the evening was the furnace washdown, where they'd use water on the fire hoses to wash the outside dust off the bricks. It also helped in the cooling process. And the demolition was starting to take place. I came on shift around 6 o'clock at night to do a 12-hour shift. I was the one of the two safety supervisors on shift that evening. By 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd just come off the furnace, and I was on the outside of the building when there was a pop, 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 and the whole side of the building shook. And I went back into the building to see what had happened, and it was like a war zone. It was the worst, undoubtedly the worst night of my life. Everything was dust coming down. It was just carnage, absolutely total carnage. All the lights had gone. We had flashlights, and we met with a couple of the supervisors and guys in one of the lunchrooms. It was close to the furnace, and they reported that there were 6 people missing. And myself and another fellow went up onto the furnace itself to see if we could find anybody. And when we got back, we did a search from top to bottom of the furnace, what was left of it. And when we got back to the lunchroom, it came over the radio that the 6 had been taken. They were at the smelter warehouse. And my immediate thought was, thank God for that, And I made my way over there, and what I saw was absolutely, I couldn't believe it. We had 4 employees who were critically burned. We're talking 60% of their bodies had been in a steam blast situation. They were being cared for by their co-workers. They'd wrapped them in what they called burn gel blankets, which fortunately we had available. The ambulance was on its way, and it arrived shortly after. The ambulance driver, I said, "How many can you take?" And the ambulance driver said, "Well, if they're sitting, we can take 4. If they're lying down, we can only take 2." And I don't know how those guys managed to shuffle out to the ambulance and sat in the back of the ambulance and taken to the local hospital. One unfortunately passed away later on, and the other 3 were flown out. Well, all 4 were flown out to burn units across Canada. That was. I took it very badly, obviously, and so did the whole community. Flin Flon is a small community, and everybody knew everybody that was involved in the explosion. They flew counsellors in. There were 60-odd people on shift that evening. And there was 12 taken to the hospital. The rest of the guys a lot of them were traumatized by the event. Some, it was as bad as you could get. As I say, I've never experienced anything like it, and hope would never have to do it again. So one of the I had a trouble talking about the whole thing, and I couldn't even talk to my wife and discuss the event. So I did take some counselling, and my counsellor suggested that if I couldn't talk about it, just to put some thoughts on paper and write stuff down, which I did, and it did help a little bit. When I retired 6 years ago, I had a drawer full of paper, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I thought it would be interesting to put something together in the form of a manuscript, and then after that, it turned into a book. So it wasn't about blame. One of the things that I was impressed in the book itself, that it wasn't written to blame anybody that was involved that evening, or prior to. It was trying to understand the events that took place that led up to it, in terms of things that were uncovered during the inquest and the inquiry, that I felt needed to be said. I was subpoenaed to attend the inquiry, and that's quite a thing when you get a subpoena asking you to appear as a witness to an event like that. And one of the things that I'd never had the opportunity to, even though I was subpoenaed, I was never called to give evidence during the inquest. And so the book helped me to cover off some of the things that I would have liked to have said, including the fact and the acknowledgement of the co-workers that took part that evening, and how they reacted, and how strong they were to do what they did. They acted really remarkably. There was a lot of heroes that night.
Yeah, and so after kind of collecting your thoughts, and I guess all those years later, going through the paper, what were some of the things that stood out to you, after you look back, and that had you maybe had in place earlier or had known about, what were some of the key takeaways for you that others could learn from?
Well, I think one of the takeaways is that you can do stuff, you can do things, and it wasn't like as if water was being used for the first time on the furnace. It was something that had traditionally been used. It was one of the things I felt afterwards was it doesn't seem like a complicated job to wash something down, but it is complex when you introduce other things to the scenario. How much water was used, when it was used, the volume of it, and the understanding of what could have happened. After the event, it seemed so obvious that um, using water around a furnace isn't such a good idea, and yet everybody on shift that night, it was part of the work in progress plan. It was right on the list of things that needed to be done that night, and was to wash the furnace down prior to other things taking place. There was new technology and new equipment being used that night for the first time that never been used before. Like the Brock machine was going to replace jackhammers, men physically on the end of a jackhammer Now you had a Brock. I don't know whether you're familiar with Brock machines or not, but they,
Oh,
they can punch a hole in the side of a furnace like you wouldn't believe. We had cat machines that were going to be used instead of the old method of removing the bricks from the furnace. There was a lot of experience lost prior to the shutdown because of pension windows that had opened up. So a lot of the supervisors who had traditionally worked on the furnace had retired, and then you had a lot of people coming in at the lower end of the new recruits, new hires that had experienced in the shutdown for the very first time. So the show experience was lacking that night. So there was a focus too, which kind of gets me a little bit, because there was a lot of discussion on an accident-free shutdown. There was even a sign on the this it was going to change every day, that the shutdown had gone without any injuries, and you know that's when today when you see those signs, this company has gone 365 days without a lost time accident. To me, that's 25-year-old health and safety. It's not today's. It shouldn't be today's way of thinking about safety. I don't know whether I'm making a strong enough point there or not, or whether you guys understand that.
I know what you mean. I've worked at places that have done that, and I'm curious. You say it's 25-year-old thinking, but maybe how should they be going about it today?
Well, I think what drives the whole thing about lost time accidents and the goal is, obviously to try and reduce the amount of accidents that are taking place. But I think what drives it a lot of the time is workers' compensation and the way they reduce their compensation rates to benefit companies that have low accident injury rates. And not sure how they would be better served by measuring something else in terms of injuries, whether uh, it's a difficult one. How do you measure safety performance if you don't measure the accidents and the incidents that are coming from it? Well, some of the things you can measure is the amount of inspections that take place, the quality of the inspections that are being done, non-conformances that are being raised through audits, the continuous effort to improve. You can measure the morale of the company in terms of employee turnover is one indicator, or the amount of grievances that are on file. There's different things that can be measured to determine whether a company's performance is improving or not.
so Brian, do you think measuring accidents and lost time is more could be compared to more like looking into the rear view mirror while driving? And if you're suggesting that they should be looking at some key metrics that facilitate safe operation, that would be on the opposite. If we're behind the driver's seat driving the operation, we should be looking through the windshield of our vehicle. Would you agree with that analogy?
Well, again, you've got to be careful with KPIs, because you can manipulate a KPI very easily as well, and that's something else that needs to be very, very careful with. And I've used some examples in the book to be wary of KPIs. I mean, it's a good thing to to have a matrix to say that you're going to be, trained, have all your employees trained in one aspect of it. And let's take forklift operation, for instance. But if those guys aren't driving the forklift every other day, it's really a very insignificant number. It's the ones that are driving the forklifts every day that you want to make sure that they're 100% trained, and not just build the numbers up of people that only use them once in a while. We went into after the accident, the explosion at the mine. The whole process underwent a review. We were prior to the DNV loss control program. We had safety and health programs in place, and afterwards we went to ISO certifications, which are a step up in terms of making sure that things are getting the attention that they deserve. External auditors coming in, making sure that things are the way they should be. Sorry?
It was good to get those certifications in place. You've seen an improvement from certifications. Just having a program without certifications was not as good, as efficient.
I think the certification programs are a good idea. They can be a little bit self-fulfilling though, but on the whole, they definitely. I think when you audit a system, not just once or twice a year, but when you take a look at it over, and do some internal audits. One of the examples we talk about in the book. The amount of paperwork that's generated, for instance, in health and safety turns a lot of people off. It seems like everything's got to be documented. And that's one of the big changes I've seen over the course of my career. And that comes from the mindset of, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Okay. And certainly within the context of the explosion, after the event, when you're in an inquiry and people want to know how did training take place, what procedures were in place. It's all part of the due diligence process to have paperwork, the training records, and the procedures available to show that there was due diligence in terms of people weren't just winging it. They had some direction that they were following, and they knew what they were expected to do. So with the paperwork, you've got to make sure it's been properly addressed, and you've got to take a look at it once in a while. And I used a classic example, and it was we're talking about arc flash. We had a arc flash risk assessment that had to be taken by the electricians that were working on energized electrical equipment. And basically, they had to write down what the information was on the warning labels and what they were being exposed to in terms of the calorie, the arc flash potential of the location that they were at. And at the end of the risk assessment, they identified the PPE requirements, the flash protection boundaries of the attendant that was in place, or the standby worker. And then they had to verify what they were going to do in case of an emergency. And basically what they were looking for is, do you have a radio communication? Is there a telephone close by? Where is the nearest ambulance station? What have you thought about when you're doing this job? And one of the electricians had written on his risk assessment, do they have cares? And that was part of the auditing not part of the auditing process, it was part of the requirements by the electrical mines inspector when we introduced AFRASH, the program in place, that it had to be verifiable, it had to be audited. And you can't do that without paper. You've got to have a paper trail to show the people have been trained and they've done the risk assessments and everything else. And it ended up it being handed to a supervisor, and the supervisor had duly filed it away, and it was in his office filing cabinet. So when the auditors come in to take a look at these things, they randomly pick, a dozen out of 60 risk assessments, and lo and behold, that's what they find. And that's the supervisor was obviously very embarrassed by it. The employee who wrote it probably figured, who does care? Because after he wrote it, it took 3 months for somebody to come back to him and say, hey, we do care. Like, acknowledge the fact that we'd seen it, at least.
Yeah, that goes back to what you were talking about earlier and had to do with leadership. And I noticed a post you had recently on LinkedIn that mentioned the Peter Principle. And I thought that was really interesting. Could you, for people that don't know what the Peter Principle is, could you explain that a little bit and then maybe give your 2 cents on, how you see that playing out in supervision, in management, and in leadership?
When I was doing some research into the book, one of the things I stumbled across quite by accident really was the Peter Principle, and it kind of intrigued me, and almost a light bulb went off, and I'm thinking to myself, I've seen it over the course of my career on numerous occasions, and that's not to demean the people that were involved in being promoted to a level within the organization where they were, and I think the Peter Principle used incompetency, that they're promoted to a level of incompetency and they used a couple of examples which I thought was give people a better understanding of it. It's not that these people are bad people. In fact, when they were doing the normal entry-level jobs or jobs within the organization, they most of the time they would excel at what they did, and because of that, and because they did a good job, they got promoted, and just because they were good at one job doesn't make them good at another job. And we've had really good mechanics, excellent mechanics, who were promoted to a supervisory role with no people skills, or once they'd taken the role, which they hadn't, and there was not a lot of ways back for them. They used an example of a school teacher being a great school teacher, and then they get promoted to school principal, and it's a different ballgame for them. They're not dealing with children anymore. They're dealing with parents, and they're dealing with school boards, and they're dealing with a whole set of new things that they've not been able to do, even contemplate. And part of that is that we don't sometimes train people for the positions that they're put into. We don't give them long enough with shadowing or spending time with the people that they're going to replace. We kind of throw them into these positions. Somebody retires or quits or moves on, and then Joe's a good guy, we'll put Joe in there, and all of a sudden Joe's up to his ears in alligators, and and struggling. That doesn't happen all the time, but I mean, I've seen examples of it where it certainly did.
No, that's a really good one. I mean, the thing that came to mind for me, I don't know why, but just because you're a good salesperson or something like that doesn't mean you're going to be a good sales manager. And so I've heard that before. And when we go back to these supervisors, and then maybe you started out as an electrical worker, and now you're a really good electrical worker. You get put into the position of an electrical supervisor, and what they didn't tell you is that now you're in a leadership position. And then and you mentioned how important that is to safety, and I think you do a really good job of that in your book and on online on LinkedIn. But yeah, I've seen that myself, and I'm sure Victor has as well.
Yeah, through the audits, it comes out. When the electrical worker was promoted to the supervisory role, and as you observe the pre-job brief or toolbox meeting, you can clearly identify that he's not in his strong suit. He's not in his forte zone. And it was at that point, it almost looks like a punishment to take person out of their position where they were happy, comfortable, performing, excelling, and then sticking them into a position that maybe pays a few dollars more, but they don't enjoy themselves anymore. So that certainly is a theme.
So Brian, we are coming up on time here. I just want to take, I guess, a moment to thank you for coming on the show. Is there anywhere, or maybe what is the best place for someone to look you up or to find your books? Do you have a favorite spot for them to reach out, maybe on social?
I've been building up my LinkedIn connections, and I'm sitting at almost 11,000 now, which prior to retirement, I think it was at 480. And I really enjoy LinkedIn. I enjoy the conversations. I like the diversity of it, and I like the differences of opinion that people put forward. I'm on Amazon. I have an Amazon authors page, Amazon, and I'm also they're available worldwide. The No Smoke Without Fire is sold in 7 countries and 3 continents, and it's been purchased in bulk by one of the mining companies in Canada to hand to all their supervisors and managers and superintendents. So it can be used as a a bit of a guide in terms of what how can I put it? It's not a textbook type of thing, but it's an understanding. It gives people an understanding of what can happen, and I hope it never happens to anybody else. But I appreciate the opportunity of coming on, John and Victor, and thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Brian. Fascinating story. Thank you.